the Learning and Development Podcast presented by 360 Learning. Martha, welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here. Great topic.
So Martha, I mentioned in the intro that you're former Chief Talent Development Officer and SVP at Comcast Cable. So could you tell us a bit about that and perhaps a bit about the business, the size and scale, and most importantly, how your talent development team supported the workforce?
Absolutely. So my role as Chief Talent Development Officer trusted me with the development of our people. And that happens in many ways. There's a lot of knowledge and skill and capability building so that people can do their jobs. And then there's the role of helping to identify those people with high potential and figuring out how to progress them through the organization. So I had the ideal best job in Comcast for a very long time. Looking at Comcast, it's a fantastic company. It's a global Fortune 10 media and technology company. Employs about 125,000 people, headquartered in Philadelphia, and has great product. It has broadband, it has media, it has wireless service, it has entertainment. And with that, it provides those product and services to both residential and also to the business customers. In addition to that, we have NBC Universal, we have the Universal theme parks, we have Peacock streaming, we have the Philadelphia Flyers, and the list kind of goes on and on. But a big company with great responsibility, great product, and a major focus on customer service, which was really important to me and to my team because we had a lot of skin in the game, both from delivering training to developing the talent.
And Martha, as you described all of those different properties and different functions, it stirred the memory banks because, of course, you know, I was at Disney and I was Director of Learning Talent and OD at Disney for EMEA. So I know the challenge of L&D at scale across many diverse functions where you have very different operating models, purposes of those functions, and even some areas where they were in total contrast to each other, which made learning and development or talent development at scale really difficult. So I wonder if you could tell us how you navigated that at a top level, and I suppose how you gained alignment at a strategic level for Comcast whilst also meeting the needs of the workforce where they are.
You're absolutely dead on with your analysis of the complication, David. It wasn't easy. However, we got some really good lessons learned. An example would be like building the partnerships with the business leaders. It was so extremely critical, so critical that I developed a governance model where we had the 10 most senior executive leaders to sit on a learning council with us to help drive the strategic direction and to ensure that we were in alignment with the big bets for the calendar year. And in doing that, the CEO of Comcast Cable and I co-chaired it. That is the executive emphasis that was put on this council. I would say to you, though, the council was amazing, so engaged with us. But a very important tactical piece of that was having a really robust intake process so that we clearly designed the content with what the business needed and stayed aligned with the business until the product was delivered and then measured. And in doing that, we would always have an executive sponsor sign off on what it was that we were doing. Because I will say to you, David, when I first took the job, it was a mess.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't alignment with leaders. People didn't know who their business partners were. Content had lots of quality issues. And we really regrouped and made things happen. And one of the things that really helped was that we centralized learning and development at Comcast in 2010. And it was amazing the improvements we were able to make to relationships and also to our products.
Brilliant. I'd love to come on and explore the Executive Learning Council in a bit more detail shortly. I think governance is an important topic Not always the sexiest topic, Martha. I think
That's right.
we could agree, but one perhaps we should dig deeper into. But before we do, you mentioned there that things were a mess beforehand, and I think that through the conversations that we have on this podcast and I have with other people, there is a strong will within the L&D or talent leadership to straighten things out, but it's never given to you. You're never given the permission to do so. You're never just told, okay, could you do a root and branch reform here and change the way for the better that learning and development is run? It's almost as if there is this invisible force that maintains the status quo because that is valued. So I wonder, how did you wrestle that permission, the green light to put in a governance model and develop perhaps the credibility with senior leadership?
So, David, my mantra before we centralized was I am accountable for what I'm not responsible. So I had about 39 of those 800 learning and development professionals reporting into me. But I couldn't really manage the work they did, the impact of what they delivered, those kinds of things. So I built a business case. And just a couple of the elements of that business case showed that there were 79 reporting relationships for learning and development people. They were into finance, into care, into HR, into all sorts of different organizations, and they were all doing their own things. We have customer care agents and we have field technicians and other kinds of technicians. When I looked at the number of new hire courses that were built and delivered across the organization, there were 30 some new hire or courses. And these were like 6 to 8 weeks long. And none of them were alike. So how are you developing agents and technicians to provide a consistent customer experience? Because they're not getting a consistent learning experience. And then one other that was just so weird. There are only 3 ways to navigate a utility pole when you're going up a utility pole. There were 11 different ways taught on how to navigate that utility pole. But technically, there are only 3 that are safe and could ever be used. So by having that data and telling the story of the way things were being done, I got a lot of buy-in. There were 2 lessons I learned from that experience in presenting the business case. Number 1, you can never over communicate to these senior executives. The more times you tell them, the more different ways you tell them, the greater the buy-in is going to be. And the other thing I learned, David, is you have to be careful with word choices. Because I used a word like agreement, a service level agreement. No, a service level commitment, things like that. And you just always say, okay, no problem. We can do that. And we got there by compromising, by communicating, and also knowing what we were doing, building the story with facts, with data. And we got the buy-in across the organization.
So you said that you started with the business case, and I suppose that's something that isn't always present within learning and development, because
That's right.
can, at our worst, we can get away with not, because if we were doing what the organization asked for, then we'd be providing learning in all its forms, and it'd only have to be popular for us to for it to be okay. But I suppose the difference here, Martha, is the size and scale and the responsibility that you had. So what did you do then, like when you joined the organization, in order to, or became responsible for the function, to assess the status quo? You said that that you sought the data and you saw the inconsistencies, but did you set out to have a business plan? Was that again a mantle given to you, or was that the approach that you brought to this?
It was the approach that I brought to this. My first role at Comcast was leading learning and development for a division of Comcast in Southfield, Michigan. So I was leading it there, and the president of that division was amazing, and he empowered me to do what I needed to do. And he gave me the budget to do what I needed to do to create a centralized learning organization for his division. And he was like instrumental in helping me to build high potentials in their development process and helping them move through their careers. And so I built stories around that. I built impact around that. And then I was asked, go present it to the corporate team, the functional corporate team. And so I did, and they liked what they were hearing. But David, it took a few years to really pull interest into what it was that we needed to do when I got to headquarters. It was really hard. And some people say there aren't politics at a corporate level. Let me tell you, there were politics.
Hmm.
So much so that I reached out to this person, a senior executive that I thought was really good at it. And I said, will you just mentor me on how to navigate the politics here? So it did take a while, but what I built was based on what I implemented on a smaller scale in the Midwest division. And it was a huge scale to make it happen for the company. But you know what? It worked. And at the end of the day, Comcast is better for what we went through.
You mentioned about organizational politics. I was the beneficiary of an HR director who was both politically aware and a great maneuverer within the politics. So I learned from her and then took that on. And I'd say that a great deal of my success was due to that. But I do remember being in a conversation around organizational savvy. And somebody quite senior in another part of HR said, I don't want to play that game. And it was put to that person, it said, it's not a game.
It's
It's
real.
about your survival, the organization. And I think it's one of those things that whilst you're unaware or oblivious, then it's almost as if things are done to you. I suppose it's like pinball. That you're the ball and you don't have a control of any of the flippers, and then you do. And I think that's very different. But what I loved about what you're saying here, Martha, is again going back to what I hear so much is that you took control of the narrative. So often in learning and development, I hear we'd love to modernize, we'd like to do this, but we can't. It sounds as if with the stories that you told and the data that you collected, you decided that you were gonna own this narrative. You were going to reinforce this narrative to the right people so that you were positioned in a way where you could be potent and make meaningful impact. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. And added to that, David, I did my benchmarking before I presented the business case to the senior executives. I worked with companies that were similar in size to us, and also companies that had similar kinds of functional employees. And I reviewed ATD's state of the industry report for a couple of years to get data from that current data. But I pulled the story not just from what I was finding in Comcast, but what I was learning from my colleagues across industries. And that helped tremendously as well. So it didn't look like it was just my opinion, right? It was built off of the successes and the opinions of others. And it worked. And I would say to you that probably the key was building relationships and actively listening. I think that I became such an active listener that I was known as an intense listener. And that's not necessarily always good.
Mm. But you're talking about the right things with the right people, and I suppose that's going to help
That's
you
right.
build the credibility as well as reinforce your message. So let's move on then to governance, because I think it's one thing to recognize that it's required. It's another one to design a governance model that's right for your organization. And then I suppose it's another thing getting it up and running and then sustaining that. So could you take us on that journey?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So I built the governance council. We called it the Executive Learning Council. I built and designed that as part of the centralization because I wanted to sell it to the leaders as a way of having structure and strategic alignment if we did centralize. And so that worked out really, really well. The governance council was a lot about strategic direction. It was also a lot about budget because my budget, while it was a $75 million budget, the money really came from the business and they would supplement that budget. So we would also talk about where we were with budget, that kind of thing. But we met quarterly with an agenda. And at those meetings, before we got there, I would ask that and these were EVPs, SVPs, the functional areas of HR, and the president of Comcast Cable. And I would ask, what are the topics that are important to you to discuss? And we would have our topics as well. And at those meetings, we would always share one of our business impact stories where we could show that we had ROI on some type of business point or business pain point that they had asked us to address, or some learning solution that we had developed, or some talent project that we were working on. And they loved it. They loved it. And they would give honest feedback. I have to tell you a story, though, David. It wasn't always good news. I'll never forget the time that we had worked with our senior business partner to build a product portal, which had training content around all of Comcast products and services, because we wanted everybody to stay up to date on what those were. And we were so proud of that product portal. And we debuted it at one of the Learning Council meetings. And the person who had partnered with us, the senior partner, was sitting in the room. And there was a visceral reaction to what we presented. This isn't right. This isn't going to work. This has to be redone. And so we just sucked it up. We said, got it, not a problem. We never went back to that business partner and say, hey, you really messed us up, buddy.
Yes, it.
But we regrouped, we redesigned, and the second run of the portal was a big hit, and it worked really well. The point is, you can't always expect good news when you go into meetings with these executives who know a heck of a lot more than we do about the business. You have to be flexible, and you have to adjust.
That was going to be my next question. To what extent does a governance model, well, of course, it's going to provide some structure, but what's the relationship between rigidity and agility within that? Because the reason I ask, and you probably know what I would say, Martha, is because without a governance model, then whilst it might be like the Wild West, you can be agile on your feet and feel as if you are responding in real time. And so the question would be, why would you impose this on yourself? I suppose the answer is going to be something about the size and scale, like the $75 million budget that you have to a degree, and the organization wanting a return on that. But that question there about rigidity versus agility, is that an either or how do you account for both?
It's both. And I think that a key is by having the Learning Council, you are preparing these senior executives to stand up for you when you're not at the table, to represent you, to share the story. And you can rest assured, before we got to those meetings, we had met with each of our functional senior executives to make sure that we were aligned when topics came up, and especially if they had put something on the agenda for us to talk about. We never went there unprepared. It doesn't mean we didn't get some questions that put us on the spot, and we would work through those. And sometimes we would say, we'll follow up with you on that, right? You just have to be flexible and agile and responsible and know what your mission is and your purpose.
The whole topic of governance and more broadly LearnOps seems to be taking a lot of limelight. There's certainly phrases that I've seen emerge over the last couple of years. How do you see this in the current context of learning and development as a whole today, Martha?
Learning operations piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. So learning operations was critical to our business, and it was top of mind always for me, because without appropriate learning operations, it's hard to get access to the data that you need to tell the story of what your team is doing, as well as the impact. And so with that, I had a learning operations team, and I had a person responsible for the budget, responsible for the data, responsible for helping us with templates and telling stories, and all of those things that get at the transactional as well as the transformational data. The transactional data being everything you find in an LMS. We used to call it butts and seats, right? But that data is really important in calculating impact. And then on top of that, learning operations, managing the LMS, the content management system, the budget, those kinds of things. Each of the vice presidents on my team who had functional areas within learning, they were responsible for getting business data from their business partners, because at the time there wasn't a unified system where I could go in and say, what did tech ops do? What did sales do? What did IT do? It required us to go to those functional leaders to get the business data for the calculation of impact. So all of that is so critical to learning operations. There are platforms today that will help us, but I didn't have a single way of doing it then. But you know what? We eventually got really, really good at it.
And so, do you think that you having a learning ops team, that it's only really important for large learning and development teams, or do you see that learning ops is now something that should be incorporated even into smaller and some of the smallest?
I think it applies to all, even if it's a team of one or three or 800, right? I think it's really important because it brings focus and it brings a pathway to data and a pathway to understanding and a pathway to telling the story. I couldn't imagine not having it, regardless of how large the team. Even as an executive advisor to startups in learning and so forth today, I have my own methods of getting to the data I need to help them. It's just critical.
Could you give us an insight into that? Because again, I post on LinkedIn, and a common response is that we don't have data. But it's always if you if you ran my learning and development function or my talent development function, Martha, I'm sure you'd probably challenge me with you're not looking in the right places. So I wonder, what are you talking about? For somebody who says to you, but we don't have data.
Yes. And what is very important is during the design phase, before you start the build of the content and you have that intake form in front of you, regardless of the format, and you're sitting with your business partner, what do you want your call center agents to do differently after we build and we deliver and they consume this training? And what are the metrics that would tell you and tell us if they were performing that particular task or job in a better way or a different way? And so you get the agreement up front. If you wait to the end, you have a disaster. You're doing a lot of replay, and it's very, very difficult. I have a really cool story, if I can tell it, that
Please.
that ties to this and ROI. I had a senior business partner, the most senior business partner in technical operations, come to me and said, I've got a pain point. I have this region within one of our divisions where we're having to roll a truck back to the customer's home way more often than we have been in the past. And just something isn't right. We've looked at the business workflow and those kinds of things. Would you come in here and help us? So we went in, we studied, we discovered, and we built a multifaceted learning solution that not only included those technicians. The technicians had the biggest part of the training, but we also had the supervisors as a part of some experiences in that. So not to belabor it, but we rolled it out to that trial team in that region, and they had such great results. We had over 700% ROI. And that business leader, he decided we're going to roll this out to the enterprise for all of our technicians, and we're going to build the savings into our budget for next year. So they had a huge savings, millions of dollars, but it was because we designed with the business partner. We knew what needed to be changed. We knew how he was measuring what was happening and how he could measure and help us measure at the end of that. But a beautiful story that just shows business alignment can lead to really great value to the business.
Without a doubt, Martha, I think that during these tougher times when perhaps colleagues and peers in learning and development functions feel precarious, it's at this point that we've got to recognize our value, which is we're invited into conversations that very few other people are invited to. And when we're in that room, we have a choice. We can either fulfill the request as it's being projected to us, or otherwise we dig and we go deeper, as you've said here, that you seek to understand what the business problem is, what the desired outcome is, and then that you zero in on what the business KPI that will determine whether performance has improved or not is available, and you work with that. And then what I love about, and this is a little insight into my thinking, Martha, I never decide on a title for a podcast until we've actually started recording it. But we're talking about storytelling again, but not in some kind of solution looking for a problem kind of way, which is, this isn't about developing storytelling skills. This is about controlling the narrative. This is absolutely crucial because the purpose of all of this is to increase the potency of the learning and development function so you can at least maintain the resources that you have available, if not increase those, because you know that you will get a return as a result of that.
Absolutely. And I think, too, building off of that, David, just recognizing that the L&D professionals aren't the business experts. We have to learn from the experts, those business leaders that we're serving, right? And the L&D professionals are the L&D experts. And I always told my team, it's sort of like when you're coaching someone. You never say, David, you need to fix this. You ask probing questions. So, business partners, what if we considered? What do you think about? How would this work? Without telling them, because the more we go at our business partner, telling them what it is they need, rather than including them as a part of the decision making, the worse the relationship is going to be, and the product will not be as fabulous as it could possibly be.
Martha, I'd like to broaden the conversation a little here and bring in the talent development focus because I had the privilege of owning talent as well as OD on top of L&D, and I saw firsthand how that integrated approach helped with what we were trying to do. And I'd love to just tap into some talent development, especially succession management, and ask, what did developing the right people for the right business needs look like at Comcast?
It was awesome. I had talent added to my role later in time while I was at headquarters, and it was phenomenal integrating talent with the learning and development function because it enabled us to help the business leaders in identifying high potentials who could be developed and their careers could be moved along. And we managed the talent reviews, and I'll talk about that in a second. We managed that as well as the development of there. We had the most robust leadership development programs that built the bench and fed the leadership pipeline. We had solutions to develop hourly employees for supervisory roles all the way up to the regional senior vice presidents. And what's so cool about that, David, our business leaders helped us design the curriculum. They helped to facilitate. They served as coaches, mentors, and sponsors to these folks, and just helped to develop some of the greatest leaders. That frontline supervisory program, the first session that we rolled out of that, over a 2-year period, 83% of those field technicians were promoted into supervision. And that is amazing. But the point being, we had the whole enchilada, right? We knew who was showing up to teach them how to be great at their functional role. We would observe, we would help the business. We helped build the 9-box to do the ratings and the evaluations. And we helped to manage the reviews of these people. When we first started doing succession planning, we managed mainly from the executive level down to like the senior director. And we had talent reviews mainly at those levels. But over time, we became so great and so bought into this that they went all the way down to the supervisory level across the organization. But one of the really cool things, the executive talent reviews, I co-chaired those with the CEO of Comcast Cable, and he was amazing. And because he was sitting at that table twice a year asking the questions, tell me about Sue, tell me about Joe, tell me what they've done because they're showing up here as a high potential. And now I want you to tell me about how they put points on the board. And that was his most famous question that became very pertinent and used across the board in talent reviews. He didn't want to just hear about your performance rating or, those kind of things. He wanted to know how you did something fabulous and fantastic that moved the people from a leadership perspective, that moved the work, that moved the integrity of our product and our processes. And he wanted specifics. And if you didn't have one of or two of those stories to tell, it didn't turn out real well. But he was great. And it just created a fabulous environment where it was healthy to talk about growing people and You would never believe the number of people that I mentored or that I coached around their careers just because we had those two pieces integrated together. And we had a team of mentors and coaches that we had identified across the organization. And we made it pretty much a requirement for high potential who had graduated to also serve and support those people coming behind them.
Yeah, Martha, that's impact in action. I've said so many times on this podcast here when, we challenged and said, that it's not possible to measure the impact of learning and development. There are too many other factors. But I think that if you are considering internal mobility as perhaps even the ultimate measure of success, because you've got an eye on that, then of course there is a story to tell. And I think that you can clearly make claim to a significant part of that 83% of promotions. But I want to go back. You mentioned wonderful accounts of leaders being actively engaged in the development process here. I'd love to know where the genesis of that come from. Is that because your CEO was just so bought in and then that happened? Was it as a result of when you were working on the succession plans and the talent management of your C-suite, and then it was so successful that you got the mandate because that was so impactful? Or did you gain the traction another way?
Of those. So we could be at the talent review table, right, with the senior executives, and something would come up that would indicate we had a gap on the bench, right? And so we would talk about it. And I remember sitting at one of those reviews, and the CEO said, we really need to build a high potential program and build the bench in the pipeline for our regional senior vice president, because some of them are kind of tapping out, right, or moving on to other roles. And so he said it. We looked at the data, we built it, but we worked with the regional senior vice presidents, not all of them, because at the time there were 15 of them, but we would handpick a few of them to serve with us as advisors on what that development, high potential development program should look like and what should be in it. And we would sign them up to be facilitators, to help work through some type of experiential learning, because we always had experiential learning. Like one of them would be how to manage a P&L for a region, right? And so we would send the data out with the help of those RSVP facilitators, and they would come in and they would help with the delivery of the program. But there was so much buy-in at Comcast to developing our bench and keeping it healthy that it really wasn't that hard. The most difficult part was being able to deliver the programs for all of the people that we needed and wanted to develop. And we were amazing at that, totally amazing. We had such great leaders, such great team members, business partners. It just worked out extremely well. And we would get so happy and applaud as people got promoted after graduating from the programs. And we would make graduation a big deal.
Good, yeah, of course, and celebrating the tremendous successes. And I wonder, Martha, in order to, I suppose, look, I've got a compare and contrast in my head on here. A lot of the time in learning and development, we will pursue something like succession planning or talent management for all because we know it's a good thing. But you mentioned earlier that you'd build a business case. Like if you're going to get further resources in order to do so, then you could probably quantify what extra investment in folks right down to supervisor would actually deliver. So what was your approach? Was it a bit of a mix, or were you business case all the way?
It wasn't business case all the way. A big part of it was, but getting the buy-in from the business leaders, because this required buy-in on down the layers of leadership to make this happen. One of the key pieces that had to be negotiated was the budget for actually building and developing, because these requests would come up. Eventually, we were able to predict based on history, but we would have to give to the business leaders, will you pay for their travel? Will you do this? Will you do that? And I will say to you, David, I cannot give you one example of where a business leader said no to me if I needed more money, more help, more engagement from them, more facilitation, more guest speaking. It was just so strongly supported. But it wasn't like that when I got to headquarters. But it was something that we built, that we evolved, that we started small. I remember the first high potential program that we developed was for the manager level, and that was way back when. But Eventually, we had it for every level, except the most senior executives, like the C-suite, they would go for external training where they were partnering with peers in other industries, like at U of Penn in the Wharton program or other places. We sent people to Harvard and those kind of things.
So would you say the key to it then is, as well as having a vision that this is something that you want to do, they're getting a track record of delivering results as a result of this, and then storytelling and highlighting and showcasing what you've been able to achieve before saying, I can do this. I can do this for this other group as well. Would you say that it was earned in that way as a kind of earn your stripes, show your work, get the credit and sell a further vision?
Yeah,
That's
you're
all.
spot on. You're spot on. You do it right the first time and you've got the buy-in. And if you're really good at it, right, and doing what's the best thing for the business as well as for the learners, it just all comes together. We were so respected for our development of people, whether it was teaching the basic knowledge and skills and capabilities that someone needed to developing leaders. And I would emphasize too, David, that we often think that leadership training, the results can't be measured. People seem to think that that's too hard. So I'll send them through the leadership development program. But things like employee engagement from their teams, customer satisfaction on NPS from their teams. After the supervisor went through training or the director went through training over a 3-month or 6-month or a 9-month period, did the key performance indicators show improvement across their team? Because if the leader's doing something different and something better, then all of those metrics are going to improve, right? And that's not difficult.
But you have to determine it at the outset. Before you even design a solution, you determine what are the key performance indicators that our leaders should be held to account to for their performance rather than necessarily for the learning, and then measure that before and after. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's a no-brainer.
Exactly.
And so, as we look to wrap up the conversation, Martha, you clearly we've only been able to scratch the surface on your experience at Comcast. But if I can ask, looking back at your time leading talent development there, what are you most proud of, and what key lessons would you pass on to L&D leaders looking to elevate their impact today?
Say that one thing I'm most proud of is that I built a smart, caring, learning and development team. And we operated and worked like a team. And that was critically important. I would say second was that business alignment that I've shared with you. And I think third was just making a difference in elevating talent at Comcast. I am so proud of being a part of that because Comcast is such a great organization. And I had so many moments of just praise and proudness and gratitude for how our company did that right. As far as lessons learned, I would say it's probably across my entire career. It's something that has helped me immensely and probably more so at Comcast. But I operate by 3 principles, and those are care about your people and the people around you, get the job done, and do it right. And the third is always act with integrity. So if you look at over the things we've talked about today, caring, business results are extremely important, and doing things with integrity are extremely important. So I would say that's a key lesson for me, and I want it to be a key lesson for leaders and non-leaders who are trying to move the needle on a business.
Yeah, fabulous, Martha. There's so much to take from our conversation today. You've been so generous with your insights and sharing your experience. All's left for me to say, Martha, is thank you very much for being a guest on the Learning and Development Podcast.
David, an absolute pleasure. Thank you.